In 1952, a housewife in Toledo, Ohio, could put dinner on the table for 6 people using 1 baking dish, 45 minutes, and less than $1. No recipe card, no cookbook, just a 9x13 pan, an oven, and the knowledge that everything in a casserole tastes like it belongs together, even when it doesn't. Number 20 on this list fed an entire church congregation for under $4. Number 11 used an ingredient so cheap that grocery stores gave it away, and the women who cooked with it never told anyone. And number 1, the casserole that showed up on more American dinner tables than any other dish in the 1950s, required exactly 5 ingredients and 10 minutes of effort. Then it sat in the oven while a mother folded laundry, bathed children, and pretended she wasn't exhausted. These 25 casseroles were not fancy. They were not photogenic. They were the way American women fed families on wages that were never quite enough. Before we start, hit subscribe. Let us count them down. Number 25, baked bean and Frankfurter casserole. Canned baked beans poured into a dish, with sliced Frankfurters pushed down into the surface like fence posts. A drizzle of molasses across the top, baked until the edges caramelized and the Franks browned. A can of beans was 15 cents. A pack of Frankfurters ran about 35 cents. The whole dinner cost under 50 cents. And nobody needed a side dish, because the beans were the vegetable, the starch, and the protein all at once. The molasses turned the top into something almost barbecued. Children pulled the Franks out and ate them first, then went after the beans with a spoon. It was the weeknight casserole that asked nothing of the cook, except the ability to open a can and slice a hot dog. Some nights, that was all a woman had left to give. Number 24, macaroni and tomato bake. Cooked elbow macaroni stirred with canned tomatoes, a tablespoon of sugar to cut the acid, salt, pepper, and a pat of butter. Poured into a dish and baked until the top went crusty, and the tomato juice reduced into a thick sauce that clung to every noodle. No meat, no cheese. A box of macaroni cost 9 cents. A can of tomatoes was 12 cents. This was the Meatless Monday, before Meatless Monday had a name. Italian immigrant families made a version with olive oil and garlic. Appalachian families made it with bacon grease. The dish crossed every regional and ethnic line because poverty is the one thing every American kitchen had in common. The sugar was the secret nobody talked about. Without it, the tomatoes were too sharp. With it, the whole casserole softened into something children ate without being bribed. Number 23. Sausage and cornbread bake. Breakfast sausage browned and crumbled, spread across the bottom of a greased dish, then covered with cornbread batter mixed from a box of Jiffy that cost a dime. Baked until the cornbread rose golden and the sausage fat soaked upward into the bottom layer, turning it rich and savory. The top was dry and sweet. The bottom was greasy and salty. The contrast was the whole point. A tube of sausage cost about 39 cents. Combined with the cornbread mix and a single egg, this fed 6 people a dinner that tasted like a Saturday morning breakfast stretched across the whole week. Southern families served it with syrup on the side. Midwestern families served it with applesauce. Nobody served it with apology. Number 22. Scalloped potatoes and ham. Thin sliced raw potatoes layered with diced leftover ham and a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Baked covered for an hour, then uncovered for 15 minutes to brown the top. The potatoes cooked in the white sauce until they were soft enough to cut with a spoon. The ham gave off salt and smoke that flavored every layer beneath it. This casserole existed because of Sunday's ham. The roast was Sunday dinner. Monday's casserole was what happened to the leftovers. A woman could get 3 meals from a single ham: the roast, the casserole, and a pot of bean soup from the bone. Wasting meat was not an option. Scalloped potatoes and ham was the second act that often tasted better than the first. Number 21. Tuna and cracker bake. Canned tuna, crushed saltine crackers, canned peas, and cream of mushroom soup were layered in a dish and baked until the cracker layer on top turned golden and crunchy. The crackers beneath the surface absorbed the soup and became soft, almost like dumplings, while the ones on top stayed crisp. A can of tuna cost 29 cents. A box of saltines cost 19 cents. The whole casserole came in under 50 cents and provided enough for dinner and lunch the next day. This was the Friday casserole in Catholic households across New England and the Midwest, where meat was forbidden and fish had to stretch. The crackers did the stretching. They turned a single can of tuna into a meal that filled the pan to the edges and fooled everyone into thinking there was more fish than there actually was. Number 20. Creamed corn casserole. 2 cans of creamed corn, 2 eggs beaten, a sleeve of crushed saltine crackers, a cup of milk, a pat of melted butter, salt and pepper. Stirred together, poured into a dish, baked for 45 minutes until the center set and the top browned into a thin crust. The texture was between cornbread and pudding, soft, sweet, and rich enough to serve as a main dish alongside nothing but a glass of milk. 2 cans of creamed corn cost about 24 cents total. Church ladies in the South brought this to every potluck because the recipe scaled endlessly. Double it, triple it, it did not matter. The proportions held. The dish came out the same every time. Reliability was the highest virtue a casserole could have, and creamed corn casserole never once failed the woman who made it. Number 19. Rice and mushroom soup bake. 1 cup of uncooked rice, 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, 1 can of beef consomme, a tablespoon of butter. Everything stirred together raw in a dish, covered tight with foil and baked for an hour. When the foil came off, the rice had absorbed every drop of liquid and turned tender and deeply savory, flavored by the mushroom and the beef in a way that plain boiled rice could never achieve. Total cost, about 20 cents. This was the side dish that made a pork chop taste like a steak dinner. The rice came out with a depth of flavor that confused people who tasted it for the first time. They assumed there was some technique involved. There was no technique. There was a can of soup and an hour of patience. That was the entire secret. Number 18. Johnny Marzetti. Named after a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, this casserole spread across the Midwest like a chain letter. Ground beef browned with onion and green pepper, mixed with cooked e.g. noodles, tomato sauce, and mushrooms from a can. Topped with shredded American cheese and baked until the cheese melted into a bubbling orange blanket. Every school cafeteria in Ohio served a version of it. Every church cookbook between Pittsburgh and Indianapolis included it. The recipe traveled because it was impossible to ruin. You could substitute any noodle, any cheese, any canned tomato product, and it still worked. Johnny Marzetti was the casserole that proved a dish did not need to be perfect to be beloved. It just needed to show up hot and cheesy on a Wednesday night. Number 17. Chicken spaghetti. Boiled chicken pulled from the bone, mixed with cooked spaghetti noodles, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of Rotel tomatoes, and enough Velveeta to make the whole thing stretch in strings when you served it, baked until the top blistered. This was a Texas and Oklahoma staple that showed up at every funeral, every homecoming, and every Tuesday when a whole chicken was the cheapest protein in the store. A fryer cost about 33 cents a pound in 1955. The boiling liquid became broth for soup the next day. The bones went to the dog, nothing wasted. The Rotel gave it a mild heat that set it apart from every other cream-based casserole on the table. Women who brought chicken spaghetti to potlucks watched the pan come back empty, while fancier dishes went home half full. That told you everything you needed to know. Number 16. Corned beef hash bake. A can of corned beef, hash spread in a dish, topped with sliced tomatoes and grated cheese. Baked until the hash crisped at the edges and the cheese melted over the tomatoes. A can of corned beef hash cost about 35 cents and contained enough calories to stun a horse. The hash browned on the bottom where it pressed against the hot dish, forming a crust that you had to scrape with a spoon. The tomatoes softened and released their juice into the cheese. The whole thing took 5 minutes to assemble and 20 minutes to bake. This was the emergency casserole, the one made on the night the grocery money ran out 2 days early. Every pantry had a can of corned beef hash behind the soup. It was there for the night when nothing else was. Not the Thanksgiving version with the crispy onion rings on top. The original, the everyday version. Canned green beans drained and mixed with cream of mushroom soup and a splash of milk, baked in a dish with breadcrumbs and butter on top. The green beans turned silky in the oven. The soup thickened into a gravy that coated every bean. The breadcrumbs browned into a crust that shattered when you broke through it with a spoon. Dorcas Riley at Campbell's created the recipe in 1955, and within a year it was in 10 million American kitchens. A can of green beans was 12 cents. The soup was a dime. This casserole succeeded because it solved the vegetable problem. Children who would not touch a green bean on a plate ate them willingly when they were hidden in cream sauce under a layer of crunch. Number 14. Broccoli and cheese casserole. Frozen broccoli, thawed and drained, was mixed with cream of cheddar soup, a beaten egg, and a handful of grated cheese. It was topped with crushed Ritz crackers tossed in melted butter and baked until the crackers went golden and the filling set firm enough to hold a serving spoon's shape. Frozen broccoli cost about 25 cents a box in 1958. The Ritz cracker topping became the signature of church supper casseroles. It was buttery, salty, and rich enough to make any vegetable taste like an indulgence. Women who could not get their husbands to eat a vegetable on any other night of the week watched them take seconds of broccoli casserole without comment. The cheese hid the broccoli. The crackers hid the cheese. And somewhere under all that hiding, a vegetable got eaten. Number 13. Lima bean and bacon bake. Dried lima beans were soaked overnight, drained, then layered in a dish with strips of bacon and sliced onion. They were covered with water, a tablespoon of molasses, a teaspoon of dry mustard, salt, and pepper. The dish was baked low and slow for 3 hours with the lid on, then 30 minutes with the lid off to brown the bacon on top. The beans turned creamy and the molasses darkened into a sticky glaze that clung to every surface. A pound of dried limas cost about 15 cents. The bacon was the only expensive ingredient, and 3 or 4 strips were all it took. This was the Saturday casserole that went into the oven at noon and came out when the family was ready. It asked for nothing but time, and on Saturday, time was the one thing a mother finally had. Number 12. Poor man's stroganoff bake. Ground beef browned with onion, mixed with cooked egg noodles and a sauce made from cream of mushroom soup, a dollop of sour cream, and a splash of Worcestershire. Baked until the edges bubbled and the top went golden in spots. Real stroganoff used sirloin strips and cost a fortune. This version used ground beef that cost 43 cents and delivered roughly the same satisfaction. The sour cream was the ingredient that elevated it. That tang cut through the heaviness of the beef and soup and made the whole thing taste lighter and sharper than the sum of its parts. Families who could never afford a restaurant meal ate this and felt like they were eating out. The casserole did not just feed people, it gave them the feeling of something better, which on a Wednesday night in February was worth more than the 60 cents it cost to make. Number 11. Bread and gravy. Casserole. Stale bread torn into pieces, layered in a dish with leftover gravy, whatever gravy there was, beef, chicken, or just flour and drippings. More bread, more gravy. Baked until the top crisped, and the bread beneath swelled with the gravy into something between stuffing and pudding. The gravy was the ingredient that cost nothing because it was already made, already paid for, already sitting in a jar in the icebox from last night's dinner. This was the casserole nobody admitted to making. It did not appear in cookbooks or church bulletins. It lived in the quiet space between one meal and the next, where a woman looked at what she had and refused to call it not enough. Bread and gravy casserole was the meal that existed only because waste was not permitted and hunger was not negotiable. Number 10. Potato chip casserole. Cooked chicken or tuna mixed with cream of chicken soup, sour cream, and cooked rice, poured into a dish and covered completely with crushed potato chips. Baked until the chips browned and the filling bubbled up around the edges. The chip topping was the entire identity of this casserole. Without it, you had a bland mixture of protein and starch. With it, you had a dish that crackled when you scooped it and tasted like something between a casserole and a snack. A bag of chips cost about 25 cents. Women discovered that crushing them over a casserole used half the bag and provided a topping more satisfying than breadcrumbs, more flavorful than cracker crumbs, and more exciting than cheese. The potato chip casserole was the dish that proved the American housewife understood texture as well as any trained chef. She just never called it that. Number 9. Hamburger pie. Ground beef was browned with onion, seasoned with salt and pepper, and spread in the bottom of a pie plate. Canned green beans were drained and scattered over the beef. Mashed potatoes were spread across the top, like frosting on a cake. The pie was baked until the potatoes browned and the beef juices bubbled up through cracks in the surface. This was shepherd's pie stripped to its bones. No lamb, no peas, no fancy stock, just beef, beans and potatoes in a dish that cost about 50 cents and that looked like something a woman had worked on for an hour, even though it took 15 minutes. The mashed potato crust was the disguise. Under it, the meal was simple as dirt. On top of it, the meal looked like Sunday dinner. That illusion kept families feeling whole on nights when the budget said otherwise. Number 8. Spanish rice casserole. Uncooked rice, canned tomatoes, green pepper, onion and ground beef, browned in a skillet. Everything layered in a dish, covered with foil, and baked until the rice absorbed the tomato liquid and turned tender and red. A strip of bacon was laid across the top and browned in the last 10 minutes. The green pepper softened into the rice, adding a sweetness that balanced the acid of the tomatoes. Spanish rice casserole was not Spanish. It was American poverty cooking with a borrowed name that made it sound exotic on the table. The whole dish cost under 60 cents. Women who made it every other Thursday did not call it Spanish rice. They called it that rice thing. Their families knew what it meant. It meant Thursday, which meant payday was tomorrow. Number 7. Corn chip pie casserole. Seasoned ground beef in tomato sauce is ladled over a layer of Fritos corn chips in a baking dish. It is topped with grated cheddar, then another layer of chips. The casserole is baked until the cheese melts, and the chips on the edges go slightly soft, while the ones on top stay crunchy. A bag of Fritos cost about 20 cents in 1957. The corn chips did what a tortilla would do in enchiladas, providing a salty corn base that soaked up the spiced meat sauce and turned into something greater than its parts. Children loved this casserole more than any other on the weekly rotation because it had chips in it. Any dinner with chips in it was automatically the best dinner of the week. Mothers made it when they needed a clean pan and no complaints. They always got both. Number 6. Salmon patty casserole. Canned salmon mixed with crushed crackers, a beaten egg, and minced onion was formed into patties and laid in a baking dish. They were covered with cream of celery soup thinned with milk and baked until the soup thickened into a sauce and the patties firmed. A can of salmon was 25 cents. The crackers and egg cost almost nothing. This was the elevated version of the fried salmon patty. Same ingredients, less mess, no standing over a skillet. The oven did the work while the cook did something else. Catholic families served it on Fridays. Southern families served it whenever a can of salmon turned up in the pantry. The cream sauce transformed what was essentially a fish cake into something that could be spooned over rice and called supper without anyone raising an eyebrow. Number 5. Baked spaghetti. Cooked spaghetti noodles mixed with ground beef browned in tomato sauce, poured into a dish, topped with thick slices of mozzarella or American cheese, and baked until the cheese melted and browned in patches. This was spaghetti that you ate with a spoon instead of a fork. It held its shape on the plate, and it reheated the next day without turning to mush. The baking changed the texture of the noodles. They firmed slightly, absorbing the sauce more deeply than stovetop spaghetti ever could. The cheese on top created a lid that held the steam in, and when you broke through it, the smell that came up was concentrated tomato and beef and melted dairy. A pound of spaghetti cost 12 cents. The whole casserole came in under 70 cents and fed 8. Italian grandmothers would not have recognized it. American grandmothers made it every single week. Number 4. Beans and Wiener casserole with cheese crust. Canned pork and beans were mixed with sliced hot dogs and a squeeze of yellow mustard, then poured into a dish. A layer of American cheese slices was laid edge to edge on top. It was baked until the cheese melted and browned into a bubbling golden crust over the beans. The cheese crust was the upgrade. Without it, you had beans and hot dogs. With it, you had a casserole that children ran to the table for. The cheese sealed the surface, trapping heat and steam underneath. When you broke through with a spoon, the beans were almost boiling. A can of beans, a pack of hot dogs, and 4 slices of cheese. Total cost under 60 cents. This was the casserole that proved cheese could save anything. Any ingredient, any combination, any level of desperation. Put cheese on top and bake it, and a family would sit down and eat without a single word about what was underneath. Number 3. King Ranch chicken casserole. Torn corn tortillas layered with shredded boiled chicken, cream of mushroom soup mixed with cream of chicken soup, Rotel tomatoes, and grated cheddar cheese. The layers were repeated until the dish was full, then baked until it bubbled and the cheese on top went golden brown. This casserole came out of South Texas ranch country and spread across the entire South within a decade. The tortillas dissolved into the sauce and became soft layers that held the chicken and cheese together like a Tex-Mex lasagna. The Rotel gave it a heat that crept up slowly. A whole chicken cost about 33 cents a pound. The tortillas were a nickel for a stack. This was the casserole women guarded. They brought it to potlucks and deflected every request for the recipe with a smile and a subject change. It went home in the pan it came in, and the pan always came back empty. Always. Number 2. Hamburger and rice casserole. Ground beef browned with onion, mixed with 1 cup of uncooked rice, 1 can of tomato soup, 1 can of water, salt, pepper, and a teaspoon of Worcestershire. It was poured into a dish, covered with foil, and baked for 1 hour. The rice cooked inside the casserole, absorbing the soup and the beef juices until every grain was swollen and stained orange and saturated with flavor. No pre-cooking the rice, no boiling water. Everything went in raw and came out done. The whole casserole cost about 50 cents and fed a family of 6 with leftovers. This was the weeknight miracle. 10 minutes of work, 1 hour of waiting, and a dinner that tasted like someone had been cooking all afternoon. The Worcestershire was the detail that separated this from every other beef and rice dish. That dark, fermented tang gave the casserole a depth that people noticed without being able to name. Women who shared the recipe always left out the Worcestershire, not out of malice, out of the quiet, competitive pride that governed every kitchen on the block. Number 1. Tuna casserole with crushed potato chip topping. canned tuna, cooked egg noodles, cream of mushroom soup, frozen peas, and a splash of milk. Stirred together gently so the noodles did not break. Poured into the dish. Covered with a thick layer of crushed potato chips. Baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the chips turned deep gold and the filling bubbled at the edges. This was the casserole. The one that every American mother made at least once a month from 1950 to 1975. The one that children smelled from the hallway and knew exactly what night it was. The one that showed up in more community cookbooks, more school fundraiser recipe collections, and more women's magazine columns than any other single dish in the history of American home cooking. A can of tuna was 29 cents. A bag of chips was a quarter. The soup was a dime. Egg noodles were 12 cents. For under 80 cents, a woman could put a casserole on the table that fed 6 people, required no skill, produced no complaints, and left her enough time to help with homework before the dishes needed washing. The potato chips were not a garnish. They were the reason. That salt and crunch on top of the creamy, savory filling was the texture combination that made grown adults eat canned tuna without a second thought. The casserole underneath was good. The chips on top made it a meal people remembered 30 years later. This is number 1 because it was not the fanciest casserole on the list. It was the most useful. And in a kitchen where useful meant the difference between a family that sat down together and a family that did not, useful was everything. That is 25 casseroles from the kitchens of women who figured out how to feed a family on almost nothing, using a single baking dish. Every one of them real. Every one of them cheap. Each was made with the kind of stubborn love that never needed to say its name out loud. If one of these is sitting in your memory right now, put it in the comments. Share this with someone who grew up on cream of mushroom soup and never complained. And subscribe, because somebody should remember what these women built, one casserole at a time.